Thank you. So it is a wonderful blessing to be able to minister to pastors and wives. The strength of our fellowship is the many couples just like you that have dedicated their lives to ministering the gospel and helping people be redeemed by the grace of God. And so I want to say on the outset that I don't have all the wisdom that there is involved in this. We may touch on some areas where you would disagree with me, and that'd be fine as far as my family and the way we've ordered our lives. This is work for us, and so if you everything that we have done may not work for you, and that's fine. One scripture I want to leave with you that is a single scripture. Luke chapter 2. Verse 52 says, Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and with man. So regardless of where else we go in this, the issue is going to be, if you're going to be successful as a couple and go the course, you're going to have a balance in life. There's a profound statement made there. In wisdom, this is mental. In stature, that's physical. In favor with man, that is social. And with God, that's spiritual. You're going to have a balance in that, and that will win the day for you, because it is very common. It was Martin Luther who said the problem with Christians is they're like a drunken peasant. You either fall off of one side of the donkey or the other. So this is the issue, and having triggered that, then I want you to go out, launch out with questions, and then I'll play off of your question. We'll see where we go. Somebody have a question this morning? Let's see it.
I'd like to add a two-part question. In the U.S., where do you see fruitfulness in pioneering, and also in the world, where do you see fruitfulness? What are the hot spots in the world that you would send?
Where do we see, or how do we get it?
Where are you seeing it now, and what do you have your eyes on?
Well, people ask me all the time what's on my heart is what field. They think that I'm just waiting around and I'm waiting for some magic moment and just waiting to send somebody somewhere, which is very rarely the truth. I play off the couples, their burden, where they want to go, and anybody that I send is generally not where I've got a map and I'm looking down to send somebody, but they have a burden, and I go off of that. If we're discipling a man, when it gets pretty close to the place, we begin to ask him what he wants to go, where he wants to go, and about 9 times out of 10, he wants to go some insane place that he'd never make it in, and so you have to give a little bit of guidance there. As naturally, your top disciple always wants to go to the heart of India or Uganda or somewhere without any experience at all. So we play off of that, their burden. We work with them and try to give them a little bit of common sense and guidance. And so fruitfulness depends on how you're going to measure it. You mean the amount of people who respond to an altar call, or the amount of people who really you can work with and make disciples out of. So those vary from place to place. And so where you see fruitfulness is where there's a couple who have tapped in, found God, and they're beginning to bear fruit.
Pastor Mitchell, in the arena of the scripture that you just gave us, is there one area that you feel or you see that there's more of a need for us as pastors to begin to develop in than another?
Well, it's a wide range. As I read the scripture, it's a balance of your development as a person. Mentally, you have to educate yourself, because we make pastors out of disciples. And so you have to balance that off against making a living, making your marriage work, taking dominion in your own life, getting dominion. So it's a wide range. But probably the most crucial that I could say to you is that our major problem in our fellowship are hobby pastors. They want to be a pastor, but they don't want to pay the price to be a pastor. If you want to be a pastor, it'll take your whole life. That means you're going to have to balance raising a family, making a living, making sermons, staying saved, and that all has to work together. But the average, or I'm not saying the average, but many men who want to be pastors, they do not have the discipline to put priority in life. And so the thing that's happening to us today is that our people generally are people who can think, they can organize, they have common sense, so they go to work for a company and or some kind of business, and they're a choice employee because they're not doing drugs. They are able to organize, they're able to work with people to some degree, and so immediately they start promoting them in many cases, and the next thing you know, you've got a disciple making $65,000, $70,000 a year, and who was at the boxer some years ago, he said it's really hard to get motivated, and you got $26 million in the bank. So this is what happens to them, is they're going to have to make a choice that you're going to have to live at the bottom of the barrel. You're going to have to discipline your life, and that's going to play out in all of life. And so meanwhile, you've got a wife. She wants everything that there is to have in life. She's dinging you all the time. We've got to have this new washer and dryer. And I'm not against women. The women all of a sudden they froze up on me right there. But you have to move in priorities. And if you're going to be a pastor, it'll take your entire life. Every moment that you're free, you're going to have to be thinking, reading, analyzing, making sermons. I know that when I was in Bible school, and I don't recommend Bible school, when I was in Bible school, but that's the only way we knew to get in a ministry, is I'm taking service call, I'm memorizing scripture, I'm reading a little bit of a book while I'm driving to these calls, and sometimes waiting on the equipment to see if I'd repaired it or not. I'm looking at a book, maybe reading a little bit of it. It'll take your entire life. And even today, when I'm flying on an airplane, I'm flipping through the magazine to see if there's anything that I could use. I scan the newspaper, see if there's anything I can use for illustrations. Magazines, I've got files of articles that I've cut out, tore pages out, or wrote little notes on and stacked. And this all becomes a part of sermon material. Meanwhile, you have to raise your family. And so I remember some years ago, I was thinking of this session, that my son Greg was whining, and Dad doesn't ever go to my games. And my wife said to him, "Shut up, your dad's a pastor, and this is what we do in our family. Settle the issue." And he turned out okay. So priority is the issue, and you have to give your whole life to it. If you're going to be a hobby pastor, quit now. Go sell insurance or used cars. Don't mess around with pastor. It'll take everything that you have.
I got a young couple in my church. They really feel called to go overseas. They're early 20s. They have a couple of kids, and the wife wanted to have 5 kids, a larger family, but they feel, or someone had mentioned to them, well, if you're going to go overseas, then you're not supposed to have more than 2 kids. Someone had told them, and so I guess
undoubtedly said, Pastor Mitchell said.
So I just wanted to know what, I understand you have a bigger family, it's going to cost a lot more, but I guess just see what your take on that is.
When you're sending missionaries, you have a number of considerations. One, if you're sending missionaries and they have teenage children, you enter into a more dangerous arena because they have hormones, they have relationships, and you have the danger of a tragedy happening in your children. And so we have had some of those. Then on the second consideration, you're dealing with finances and materials. And so they finally put Emily in I think it was an Episcopal school, an Anglican school, and for a while. But if you're in many countries, the only available, there isn't some countries have, missionary organizations have started schools that you can get them in. Most of them do not if they're third world. And so then you've got international school. And international school, it's huge fees. They get a decent education. So almost all of them will say when you want to send them, you can homeschool your children. Oh yeah, no problem, whatever. And so that lasts about 3 months. And then they call and, I can't do this. We can't do this in our family. So then you're already invested in, and so you have to make a decision. So if I've got people coming to me and they've got 5 kids, it would greatly restrain me from sending them to certain places. So that's the answer. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't do it, but it would depend on the age that they are, and would depend on what's available for schooling and who the couple are, because some couples can very successfully homeschool, some can't. So those all have to factor in.
Pastor Mitchell, if next week you were going to get sent out and you're going to go and pioneer church, you had to get a job, you had kids with you. If you were going to do that all over again, what would your schedule look like? What kinds of things would you be reading? What would you be doing if you were going to go pioneer working a job next week?
Well, to start with is you need to have in your mind right from the beginning that you're going to pastor. That's what you're going to do. So you're going to have to order your priorities on where you're going to live, what scale that you're going to live at. And so today, young couples get married, and the minute they get married, they get a 3-bedroom house. Someday they may want somebody to come visit them or whatever. And it's just insane. We live in an insane generation. They don't think. And so I'd live at the bottom of the scale, get as cheap a living as I could, because that's going to be important. And I would try, if possible, to live with a part-time job. Okay. And so, but that depends on how old your children are. Some places today, the laws won't rent to people unless, if you got 4 kids, you got to have a certain size house. So everything's changed today than it was when my wife and I were starting out. And so you have to understand that when we started out, we were pioneering old churches that already existed. And they had houses to live in that would have been condemned if anybody ever inspected them. And so, but we made do. We lived within our means. When my first church was Wickenburg, Arizona. I had a trade. I could repair laundry equipment. I drove into Phoenix one day a week. I wouldn't work any more than that. I had talent. I could work. I could produce, but I would only give them one day a week. And if we had some disaster that car repair or something, I'd work 2 days maybe. But I kept it at a minimum. We stayed out of debt. We ate at a lower level. And I was in Bible school. We ate a lot of Spam stew. Hamburger. Spaghetti. So you have to make up your mind that you're going to be a pastor, and to do that you got to stay out of debt, and you've got to drive an older car, and you've got to discipline your life. Our great event in that church was Sunday night. We would go to Greasy John's, had a grocery store with a grill in it. And so made the most delicious hamburgers you've ever eaten in your life. And my wife would run up while I'm changing, because it's hot weather and I get out of my clothes, I'm soaking wet. She would go up and get the hamburgers. This is a treat for our family. And so we did fine until one Sunday night I went up, and they called him Greasy John for a reason. And the grill was bowed like that. I don't think it had ever been cleaned. It had a tin can under to catch the grease, and I think he repaired automobiles on the side because there's black grease under all his. I couldn't ever eat a hamburger again. But I think we could get a hamburger then for 25 cents. So you have to live, and you have to do that deliberately. You have to make up your mind tonight. What do you want to be? You want to reach souls. You want to do a work for God. If you do, you can't have everything in this world and do it. That's the bottom line, and that's the major problem, as the brother asked. This is the major problem today. So that's what I would do. And depending on how old you are, whether you have, what kind of talent you have, that would depend. You have to work within that framework.
Pastor Mitchell, in along the lines of employment, I've pioneered and been a working pastor and now taken over a church. And you go from one extreme of I was discipled here in San Antonio, and then you go pioneer and kind of like you're all busy, and then kind of like the brakes are pulled a little bit, and it's a little bit slower because now you're in a different dimension. You're working as a pioneer pastor, and you're also a working pastor, and then taking over. Now in that dimension, I'm full time. Would you say that a pastor should work more in the house or at the church? Because sometimes, like for myself, I'm trying to find a balance to where if I work if I do things at home, I'm pulled to do this.
You're talking about study and making sermons?
I'm pulled to do this, pulled to do that. Like in a job where when I was a working pastor, I woke up, went to work, had to do my sermons after I got off of work at 3 o'clock. I went in early at 4:30 in the morning, worked at Chick-fil-A, got out and worked on my sermons and all that. Now that I'm a full-time pastor, my mindset is like, do I do all my work at the church or do I come home? But when I come home, I find myself being pulled on other things that the house needs to get done.
Yeah, you'd have to adjust that to your personality. I have always worked out of my house. I like that, and I have we have a 4-bedroom house, and one is my wife's office, one is my office, and so I like that because I'm there, I'm accessible. Before I ever had a separate, I worked out of our bedroom. When I first went to Prescott, we had a headboard. I stacked newspapers. My wife said, someday that's going to fall off and kill you, And so I had a little table that I worked at, and I did that for years. So it has to be your personality, and what works for you. And one of the reasons I did that, we have 5 kids, and so I could shut myself away in there and not be bothered all the time by the kids, although they from time to time have access. So you have to work that out to your own personality. I prefer working at home and answer my own phone and so on. So I've always done that.
First-time pastors who are thinking about sending out their first church, what to look for in preparation to send out their church. How many people do you recommend the church to have? And is it recommending them to be full-time pastors before they even think about sending out a church?
Yeah, there again, depends on your situation. I don't recommend that they send anybody out unless the church is run at least 75. There's a reason for that. Is that number one, the dynamics of discipleship means that they're going to have actual ministry. So 3 principles of discipleship is impartation, that's person to person. The second is involvement. They have to have actual ministry to be able to develop any kind of an ability to deal with people in an arena of spiritual dynamic. And then thirdly, of course, is a spiritual dynamic. They have to be in a place they see people get saved, see people get healed, see people get delivered, to develop that spiritual dimension. So if you have a small church, generally the pastors try to develop a disciple by having him preach for them while they're out somewhere wandering around. That is not what develops a disciple. What develops a disciple is having an arena of a concert, outreach ministry where they're actually preaching to people, they're feeling the impulse of that, having to deal with people in that arena. So 75, that's number one, is I established that some time ago as far as I'm concerned. They ask me, I tell them, that's my conviction. If you want to send them out, you got 5 people, that's up to you. But what happens then in those small churches is they'll send a man out as their best person that they have. And they send them out, and that's the engine in their church. They send them out, and then the home church dies because they've killed their church. Second thing is you run into the danger of sending a worker out not being able to properly support them. You can't get them a building, you can't get them any equipment, and so they've got a credit card. You say, use your credit card, and so then they go out, they don't make it, then they're head over heels in debt, they don't make it, and then they're embittered that this doesn't work, or you didn't help them enough, and so all those dynamics begin to crank in. So you want to keep those in mind. You want to put some money in a kitty if you're going to plant a church. Don't send out your top tither, who's the only guy in the church that tithes, because you're dead. So just common sense will help you a lot. So those are little dynamics, and I say there could be variations on that, I don't know, but these are things that I've come up with that I see and that we have experienced. So when we send a worker out now, I send them out on full support. We are pioneering salary now, as a general rule, is $350 a week salary, $750 for rent, and so that forces them into a lower scale of living if they're going to be that. And I tell them we're going to carry you for 3 months, and then after 3 months we'll evaluate that and see how you're doing. And so what I expect them to do, I've just got a guy back east now, he called me, wants to buy a building, and I said, you're not even open yet, buy a building. And so I said, find a hall, hold services in your home. Most of our guys, they start out, they hit the ground running. Witness to your neighbors, knock on doors, have a Bible study, and then we'll move from there, and that's very important. So that's the agreement we have. We're going to send them out for 90 days, full support, if they're pioneering, and then within 18 months, if you're not making some tracks, I reserve the right to bring you back home, help us here in the church. Then you have the other, I think somebody asked me about you taking over a church. So we just, I think we made 3 or 4 changes just recently, put them in an older church. So what I do in that is I put them on full pioneer support again to start with, and say this is what we're going to do. I'm going to do this for 3 months. I'm going to evaluate it then. So they have a chance to go and make the thing go. And in one of these, a man took a church which has not supported the pastor for probably 8 years. And he's taken it. It was taking in $4,000 a month. And the first month he was there, he took in $11,000. We sent him his support this month. He called me yesterday or the day before, said, Pastor, we don't need support. I'm sending the support back that you sent. It'll be there. I'm full support on that. So there's the difference in people. Say, what was the guy doing? Stealing? I don't know, but he wasn't. All I know is that it wasn't, and now it is. And then we've got another one that he's on full support. And this man is running like 80, 85 people. Just had a revival. That church has run like 55 people forever. And so it's just a difference in people. There's a lot of dynamics that come in. And as I say again, as I say to many of these questions, depends on the situation, on what you're going to do. Okay.
Oh, Pastor Mitchell.
Real loud for me.
The question that I have is that we're pioneering a church, and it seems like with our children, I'm not sure if I'm the only wife that battles this, but with our kids, it seems like we spend a lot of time spending with the church and less time with our kids, and we try to bring that balance, but then I feel guilty because you spend more time. And so we do try to find a balance, but what would you suggest that would help with you? Because we do take our children to the fellowships, and we try to be, but even at the fellowships, it's like we spend 80% or 90% of time with the people, and our kids are still in the
the issue
background.
is that they're PKs, they're preachers' kids, and they're going to have to adjust to that. And that means you're not going to be able to take a 3-week vacation to Disneyland with them. You're not going to be able to cater to their every appetite and desire. You have to let them realize that this is who we are, this is what we do, and this is our life. And so when I first went to Prescott, sometimes we had 3-week revivals. Took the kids when they couldn't stay awake anymore. They got a quilt and planted them down. They got homework, said you get it done because we go to church. We're going to church. This is what we are. And so all of our kids survived. We only got one backslidden out of the bunch. And so you have to adjust. That's what you have to do, because you are wanting to do work for God. You've dedicated your life to that. And, children are habitual complainers anyway. Right? I get every once in a while, we get an opportunity to offer it to a family, the school's not out. Well, and you tell the kids, oh, my friends, I'm all my friends. Shut up. We're moving. It takes them at least 3 weeks to make all new friends. They adjust wonderfully. They're very, very pliable little creatures. And there again, you see, we live in a generation that caters to what we've got is we've got kids that are running the world, and the old folks who've gone out to play. So you have to make up your mind that you're going to be a pastor, and you're going to raise your family in that framework. And however that has to come to plant right from the beginning. This is what we are. And so you have to do all kinds of things. I've called my kids right out of the service, say, hey, come up here and sit on the platform. You can't behave yourself. Only takes about one of those, and you've cured the problem. That's right. Says I'd traumatize them for life. Somebody else.
Pastor Mitchell, in discipling men, the generation that I was and the generation that's coming, a very emotional generation, and it seems like, you put goals before them. Used to be men would strive for that, but it seems like more and more they'd rather just give up and just rather say, well, I don't want that pressure, and just kind of remove themselves rather than strive and work through the struggle. So in discipling men, have you made any type of adjustments to try to deal with that, per se, in the generation that we're facing?
You mean set them down and shrink them with a psychological explanation? No, and I don't buy that this whole generation is that way. There may be that to some degree, but the real issue is the example you set. See, people are sheep. And they want to follow, and they will follow an example. People come to church generally because they're looking for something and somebody to follow. And actually building a church is setting an example for people that they can follow and leading them. And so I know that there are to some degree, but I don't think the whole generation that this is true. The major thing we have is internet and porno, television, games, electronics. This is the deadly factor in our generation. But men are looking for a man to follow. I can tell you that. Inside most men is the DNA. What is a man, and what is he supposed to do? I know you think they know, but they don't. And so they're looking for an example, and someone that knows where they're going, has good judgment, is able to give some advice, and that's what they're really looking for. Most women are looking for a good man to follow. I know you've got the whole women's liber thing, and you've got all that to deal with, but most women are looking for a man who has at least a brain that they can commit their life to and raise a family and be happy. They're not happy being, Rosa the Riveter. They're not happy. Joyce Meyer, put your Bibles on. Most women don't want to be that. They want to have a man that they can trust, that loves them, cares for them, demonstrates that to them, and that they can trust. Most women want that. Now you've got the odd one that wants to take charge, but it's your job to make sure she doesn't. That answer your question?
Pastor Mitchell, I have some men that come to my church, and what they've told me, they're good men, they're committed, they come to prayer, but they've called me that they're not called to preach.
They're not called to preach?
Not called to preach,
okay.
But I want to use them anyway, because I want to get the ball moving, even though they're not called. I still use them in that sense of maybe taking up an offering. We're an outreach. I let them lead it and do that. You feel that it's okay to put them in that arena, even though they're not called. They've told me, Pastor, I'm not called, but they're faithful. They come, outreaches, they pray.
Yeah.
They're good men.
That's a bad term. I had Dick Mills tell me years ago. He said, pastors come to him and say, hey, I can use you. He said, I don't want to be used. So, there's no problem with that. I don't know what you're talking about, what time frame, but you don't want to just take someone in cold off the street and put them into ministry that day. But then again, you're pioneering. You'd have to measure that out, because when you're pioneering, immediately you get an influx of religious people that have got thrown out of the last church for molesting children or whatever, and they want to join you to get a new start. So you have to measure through that, depending on what you have. And people who leave one church going to come to this church and get ministry there. We have ethics in our fellowship that we developed years ago, that we're not going to proselyte each other's music groups or their pianists or their people, that we're not going to do that. So, but you use good sense. You should know something about them before you put them in public ministry. I'd find out a little bit about them, but when the last time their poster came up on the
Pastor Mitchell, when you're considering a couple to put out to pioneer, and a lot of times we pay attention to the man, we know the man's got the call, and a lot of times, but sometimes the man wants to drag the woman's like, I'll go wherever you go, but they're pretty much putting the brakes a little bit and stuff. How would you minister in that sense, or how important is it for how involved the woman has to be a part of that?
Well, you'd have to measure that out depending on the couple. When you say she's dragging her feet, well, how? Is she tearing the pavement up or she's trying to go, or so? And it would depend on the man. You see, there may be factors you don't know about, is that she thinks he's got a screw loose, maybe, and he's demonstrated that without good judgment in the house or in the relationship, and so he's wanting her to go off and launch on this risky adventure, and he has not demonstrated to her that he has good judgment. So you have to take that into consideration. So it's good that you have an acquaintance with them and relationship, so that you're able to listen to her, what her thought is on this. And that's very important. As far as her being in ministry, you have to measure that out. As I say again, in our relationship, we've done what worked. I don't want my wife counseling. I don't want her counseling women, because there's so much nasty stuff out there. Women are very fragile creatures, and they don't need that garbage loaded on them that they have to worry about all the time. My wife, when we first went out, we had no music, so she's going to try to play the piano. And so she has a hymn book. She's practicing on Saturday. And Saturday and Saturday night, my life is a living hell. Because she's not a natural musician. She's being thrust into this thing. And finally I said, hey, don't worry about it. We'll go a cappella. And so I pastored 11 months leading a congregation a cappella. She at one time tried to teach third grade kids. And so same thing. She's trying to get this lesson together for these kids. And it's just, I mean, she's not, her nature's not equipped for that. And so I said, forget it. You don't have to do that. And so my wife has been a wife. She raised the children, followed me wherever that I felt God had called me to preach in some very unpalatable situation. In Canada, in early ministry, and I pastored in Canada, and she followed me there with 5 kids. So I've been happy to have her be a wife. And when women call her to counsel, said, you need to talk to my husband. And so that's worked for us, and I still have my wife with a sound mind and would follow me anywhere in the world today. So that works for us. It may be different. I had a pastor some years ago send him out to Pioneer, and so he called me on the phone and said, you know, my wife is, I'm having trouble with her. And I said, what's the problem? He said, she won't do follow-up. She's not following up these people. I said, who did I send out to pastor? Well, me. I said, then you're the guy that's a pastor, not your wife. She's not the pastor.
That's right. Come on now.
And if you let her be the pastor, you got a hard road ahead. Okay.
Just in the way of balance, I recently got a hold of Pastor Greg Mitchell's sermon building seminars.
Greg Mitchell?
Yeah, and I mean, it's just tremendous help to me, but just in the light of that, you know, where's the balance between putting sermons together? I know that building a sermon for me takes a lot of time, and so the balance between that and just going out, loving people, fellowshipping with them, and the balance between standing up and preaching a sermon and just, you know, dealing and working and growing your people on a personal level.
Well, there again, it depends on your personality, and you have to learn to be a preacher, or it's not automatic. Some people can get up and just, you know, they just roll out words for hours, but most of us are just common people, and we have to work. Anytime you see me preach a sermon, there's hard labor has gone into it. As the old saying goes, anybody can preach an hour and a half without even preparation. But if you want to preach 30 minutes, it takes about 4 or 5 hours to put it together. So you have to learn to do that. And Greg's session on sermon buildings, excellent, tremendous. I've talked to pastors. I was just talking to Pastor Stevens again. We have these little sessions where we go in and teach men to build a sermon from scratch. And so that becomes very, very valuable. Some years ago, Scott Lamb and Tom Payne came to me because they were on trips to Israel or Turkey, and they saw me working with pastors before the tour and after the tour and putting sermons together. And so they were so impressed with how I organize my material. And they said, Pastor, we've got tremendous pastors. Their thoughts are tremendous. They don't know how to organize them. And so they're all over the map. And so we did the first one of these in Prescott. We had 77 men. I had 11 leaders that I come in, Pastor Warner, Jeff Renz, Rich Cox. And so we split up in 7 or 8 people to a group and made a sermon from scratch, cold turkey. Somebody had a thought, Great. But I instructed all those leaders, don't bring a sermon. We just want a thought of some kind, or get it from the people that are involved. So we've done some of those, and I've talked to a couple of 3 pastors, Tom Payne. I just talked to Pastor Stevens. He asked me if I'm ever going to do one of those again. I do them for Sispansky when I can. Scott Lamb, sometimes when I go in to preach, I'll sit down with a pastor and over breakfast we put a sermon together. I've done it with Pastor Ruby here at a restaurant somewhere, Country Kitchen. And so those are very valuable, because what they do is this gives pastors some insight in how to organize their material. Because a lot of times pastors have tremendous material, but it's not connected, and they get sidetracked on the issue. And so on the tours, when I go the tours to Israel, we had as high as 40 men in a room. They furnished a room for me. We had as high as 40 men in a room, with about 6 or 8 contributing, and the rest of them watching the thing develop. And I got 13 new sermons on that tour. And I don't know how many they got, but the real key was that they see how to organize the material. And so that's very important. If you ever have an opportunity and they're having any kind of a sermon making session, get in on that. Because if you got somebody that's a leader, while I'm doing that, I say to them, no, that may be a good thought, but it's irrelevant to what we're doing. Or if don't feeling kind, I say, that's a rabbit track. You're off on left field. And so I think Pastor Greg was in England some years ago, maybe a couple of years ago, and he was in a sermon making session of about 6 or 8 men. And one of these guys would bring a thought had nothing to do with the issue, which is common to pastors. And so he would say to him, hold that thought, and we'll come back. And so after about 8 times of that, this pastor said, if I have to hold another thought, I'm going to explode. And so it's odd, you watch how people's mentality functions, but in those sessions it's so valuable, because they see how to organize, how to get an introduction, how to organize the material, and how to conclude it and bring it to. So those are very valuable, and I know that Pastor Ruby has done those. If you ever get a chance, you need to do that.
Older couples, what sort of factors do you look at if they want to go out and pioneer, or if they want to go out and pastor another church, or maybe they came back for redirection, have been sitting in the church for a while, and you start to weigh out whether an older couple is qualified to go back out into the field? What sort of factors you would look at? When I first got sent out, I was 34 years old, and that was a long time ago. And I thought if I waited another year or 2, I'd be too old to go out. And now we find that there are older couples that are wanting to go out again, and I wonder what sort of factors play in your mind along those lines.
Yeah, there again, it would depend on on who they are, whether they are able to relate properly to people, whether they're financially involved, that they can or can't. We've sent out numbers of older people as years have gone on. And the major, whether they're young or old, has to do with finances. This is a major factor that is make or break. And if a couple is not able to discipline their finances, they'll never be able to follow and pursue the will of God. I had a man some years ago that was after me to send him overseas, and finally he worked for an oil company. He was working in Venezuela. But he, every so often we want to go as a missionary. He's making a living as an executive, big pay executive. So he came back to his church, and then I had an opportunity in Venezuela, which is very unusual. And so I called this man and I said, you talked to me, you want to be a missionary. A missionary doesn't make what an oil executive makes. You know that, don't you? Oh, yeah, no problem. We got no problem with that. So then I told him what the opportunity was to take a church that's already established. And he said, well, yeah, I'd be really interested in that. And I said, I'm talking now. Oh. No, we've just bought a new SUV, and we've got a house that we got. And I said, forget it, you're not qualified. So finances, to discipline yourself financially. Even if you're never going to pastor, you need to discipline yourself financially. You cannot live on credit cards. You cannot get yourself involved where you cannot be flexible. This doesn't mean you should never own property. Doesn't mean you should never buy anything. But financial discipline is one of the major difficulties of our generation. People have to have a certain standard of living. They wouldn't think of dropping down for that, and they get themselves overwhelmed that when they miss 2 paydays, they're dead. And so you just have to, that's a major problem, whether young or old. So.
Pastor Mitchell, I have a question for you. We saw the Iron Curtain come down and open door for Russia, and we see an explosion in Russia. Now that we're seeing the strife and conflict happening in the Middle East, what's your perspective on our fellowship and the opportunities presented there, perhaps in the future?
Yeah, I don't really know. I have people that ask me. I don't want to get sidetracked in world events and politics. But I'm not sure where we're going in the Middle East. I don't have any line on that. I know that there's going to be an absolute paradigm shift in the political realm, undoubtedly. The Middle East, you're dealing with a totally different dimension than you are anywhere else. You're dealing with a Muslim country. And Muslim country has different dynamics than any other country we work in. So we went into Turkey, which is a secular Muslim, not a radical Muslim, secular Muslim. And the first good couple they had with great promise got saved. They actually joined a tour, got on a bus with us, and I think the next week after that they got saved, and the man got a call for a job. They lured him out to an alley and shot him, tried to kill him, and he moved out that night and moved to another city. So you're dealing with different dynamics, and I don't really know, dear, if we had in our churches someone who can relate, can speak the language, that's number one, and could relate, it would change the dynamics in my mind of who we would try to send. To send Jeremiah Whacker into Egypt, I wouldn't even consider it, So, but something's radically shifting there, and I don't know where it's going, but it's going to bring a total paradigm shift in the world. I can tell you that.
Hello, Pastor Mitchell. I'm overseas, and I wanted to know just exactly what you were saying about the dynamic of that hostile environment where that man got shot. I'm in Sri Lanka, and one of the things I noticed, especially being, there's 2 missionaries in Sri Lanka, me and this other man, and we are probably about 45 minutes away from each other. And one of the things when I'm outreaching is that sometimes I will be surrounded by different kind of guys, and I'm always noticing how I'm always having to look over my shoulder, move very quickly sometimes. In dealing with that dynamic and many missionaries that you have sent into kind of places like that, what are some things that you give them advice in that kind of arena?
Well, there again, it depends on what you're dealing with. You have to use common sense. And if you're in a dangerous place, you have to have a dimension that develops for that. Pastor Greg Mitchell, when he pioneered and pastored in South Africa, he never did tell us a lot of the dangers that he was dealing with. They don't dare stop at a stoplight at night because they have people waiting. They'll hijack them or shoot them and steal the vehicle, whatever. He had one event when he dropped the speaker and had a cul-de-sac. He's turning around, and when he came out, there's a car that tried to cut him off, and he's very alert. And so he sped around it, got away from the guy. And one time he says that he was shot at also. So you have to use common sense. And so you obviously, in some places, you're not going to be able to street preach and do what we do. It's common sense. And so some places you can. Who was telling me some place either yesterday or today that they're preaching in Malaysia, which is great because of the strong Muslim influence there, and that's a great scene. But we just had Kevin Foley, who was in Hyderabad preaching. They have a missionary there, and the officials came next to the last day and made him sign a paper. He's leaving now. They deported him. So you're just dealing with all kinds of different dynamics, and that's up in Hyderabad where radical Hindus are. So it's every country, you just have to, you're there, you have to know what's there, and you can't do some of the things that we do. On the other hand, I wouldn't waste my life not being able to do anything and just mark time. As if you can't do, to some degree, evangelize, you're wasting your time, because you'll never build a church. So you'd have to play it by ear.
Pastor Mitchell, I have a question, and that is in the area of TV. In a church, at what degree in discipleship or what ministry does TV become a concern in disciples as they're rising up into different ministries?
I'm not understanding you, the question.
The TV, in other words, I've learned that...
Television?
Yes, television, yes. At what degree in the discipleship or in ministry is TV a concern? When a man is rising up.
I watched America Ruined with TV. I'm the generation that saw it come in. And so, as far as I'm concerned, I would not put anybody in ministry of any kind publicly, a music group, Bible study, that owns a television. If they got a television, that shows me already. It's like someone who smokes. Their problem's not smoking. The problem's something else here. You follow me? Same with the television. It's a symbol of something that's lacking of consecration. So that's my statement to you. But it's much worse than that now. It's almost beyond any kind of control or policing that you can give, because they can take a cell phone now and click onto a website and see a naked woman perform for them for a fee. This is the generation we live in. Porno is everywhere, and it feeds off of an appetite that's been yielded to and addicted to. And so there hardly is a month that goes by that we're not having to deal with this somewhere in a serious realm, which is remove someone from ministry, or the home is broken up or whatever, because they call me for advice. And so it's a very serious problem, and it's not getting any better.
What would be 3 all-time must-read books for pastors? Pushing 5 out of 3.
Say again?
The 3 all-time classics for pastor on books to read. Other than to read, yes. Other than the Bible.
Who knows? Yeah, I don't really know. I've read a mountain of books, and Coleman's book on discipleship is a classic, old-timer. I read it long before I even knew what it was. I read that book on discipleship in 1968, I believe. Well, it was 1970 before I read it. I said, man, that's good. Yeah, that's great. But I interpreted it by my experience. See, you cannot teach a person above the level of their experience. Otherwise, you're just teaching facts, but it doesn't lock onto them. So when we started reaching the hippies in Prescott, and we started working with them for the first time, I understood Coleman had never made a disciple. He's talking about seminary and Bible school, which is all true from the Bible. But when we started making them, then I said, this is where the rubber meets the road. This is reality. And then I understood what was in the Bible about discipleship. I didn't understand it before. It's just information. So there are many books. A lot of guys, they read war books, war history. If you want history, probably the 2 books that that I would recommend that are very, very good is The Last Lion, which is Winston Churchill, the first book. Is very, very good, gives you some real insight in some world history. And The American Caesar by Maxwell on Douglas MacArthur, to give you the Pacific, because this generation doesn't know anything about history. And so those two would be classic. Other than that, why, it's just a wide range of books. You would read about one book out of 5 that's worthwhile. But I will finish them anyway. I discipline myself. I'm gonna finish it. I don't agree with the guy. It's a bunch of garbage, but I'm gonna finish it. One very good book, if you can get it, I don't know if you can get it, is The God Players by Earl Jabay. Jabay. You'll have to get it off of Amazon.com out of used books. Gives tremendous insight. He spent his life working with alcoholics. That's a tremendous book. I just read one that you need to read. It's up to date at the moment, called The Trojan Church. And it gives you some insight on the mega churches and how they're getting into the occult, and he uncovers some of this. Another book that is worth your time is Hipster Christianity. Stay with it till the end, because the last 2 chapters he nails it down, and it's talking about the cool church, the hipster church, which many of these mega churches are reading, and he comes to the conclusion that they're not real Christians at all, which is true.
Pastor Mitchell, I want to go back to the area of women in an expression in the church, especially.
Getting very nervous territory here.
Very nervous. But not so nervous, so I'm standing up here. But my wife and I have been in church since we're very young, teenagers. I worked with people, led people to Jesus. She did as well too. And in that, being not married, and bringing people to church and encouraging them and talking to them and being a witness. And of course, I believe in her side, coming to perhaps a situation where it says, you need to go talk to Pastor Ruby, not getting, but, small things. Does that end for a woman when they do get married to a person that does get sent out and they have no expression as far as in current? Where is that balance between talking to a woman about woman things and saying, well, you need to go talk to the pastor about that? Because my wife...
And the spiritual issues is what you're dealing with. My wife counsels people about babies, how to do this and care for babies. But as far as their spiritual problems, she says, you need to talk to pastor. And I'm very adamant about this personally, because I see women that are forced into an arena, which is actually a pastoral arena, and it does strange things to them.
Pastor Mitchell, I'm his wife, and I have a question. And it's not about
you
wrestling.
His wife?
Yes.
Shut up.
No, my question is in the area of people who are in ministry and tithing. Because he doesn't like to know what people give. He knows what's in the bank and what comes in and stuff, but he doesn't like to know individuals' givings and stuff like that. That's, because he wants to be free to preach. That's how we've been taught, free to preach on giving. But is there a time where someone who's being raised up in ministry, or somebody who is in ministry, and they're not giving, or they've stopped giving, where the wife should tell him, this is the situation, this person is no longer,
Well, I would never have anybody in any position to affect people or leadership, Bible study leader, or any position that does not tithe.
If he doesn't know that they're not tithing, is it my place to tell him?
Well, yeah, I don't go over and say who's tithing, who's not. I don't even know unless I get a problem. They begin to develop an attitude, and then sometimes I'll call the treasurer and say, would you tell me about the financial position of these people tithing? And if they're not, why then that's tithing, you're stealing from God. I've never known a person in my entire ministry that ever made it that did not tithe. They don't last because it's dishonesty, and God will deal with them. This is why I believe in passing the plate. I want them to say no to God. Okay, that's my philosophy.
Pastor Mitchell, here in San Antonio, we've been really wonderfully sheltered from a lot of things that have taken place in our fellowship. And so my question is what can we do to make sure that we don't follow the steps of those who have fallen from these last two I guess, separations or splits that have taken place in our fellowship? Because we don't know all the details, and thank God we don't have to know. But as men of God, and we understand these guys, or these men, they were good men, anointed and so on, but yet they failed. And so the thing is what can we do to not go down that road? What should we look out for? What should we do or not do?
Well, to begin with, you have a good leader, which is totally dedicated to the fellowship. So that's what sheltered you. But put in your thinking that as years roll on, if Jesus tarries, there's two things that are deadly in success. I preached a sermon, I think I did in Australia. I used this statement that for every one person that is destroyed by failure, 1,000 are destroyed by success. And so, for instance, if you talk about Holton, Coolidge, and Johnson, these men had a pact between them that they were saving up $200,000 in every church to enable them to split, and did it. They had it there. Johnson's the only one that lost his nerve, but they felt that would give them enough to overcome. So these men were given platform, they were given exposure, and so, but they were kinky a long time before that. I was tempted for years to stand them up at the conference and say, Holton, stand up, Johnson, stand up, Coolidge, stand up. You see these men are rebels. Get out of this tent, and everybody that wants them. But the Lord wouldn't let me do that. See, I knew I'm having to deal with all this garbage, but I knew that they were kinky. And so you just have to pray, wait your time, because you've got the tares and the wheat thing. And so what really happened is God exposed it, because when the Toronto-Brownsville insanity came down the pike, I almost immediately stood against it. It's not God. I've seen this before. See, I'm older. I'm from another generation. Said, I've seen this before. This is not God. Well, when I did that, they said, we got him now. He didn't want revival, and so they began to promote it. None of them actually got into it. It was very interesting. But they began to promote it as a revival that I was standing against, and when they did, they discredited themselves. God did it, and he did it the right way, and we lost a minimum of what we would have lost. So follow your leader. And two things: very few men can handle large amounts of money and the adulation of a crowd. Those two things are deadly. Because if you're not careful, you begin to believe your own press releases. You know, I go to these places to preach, and I'm embarrassed. The pastor gets up, and you'd think that I was in a place, and the guy's taking the offering, and it's, me and Moses and Abraham. We're like that. I'm embarrassed. I'm sitting there, and you'd have thought that I singularly, God gave me this fantastic vision of I didn't even know what we were doing for 5 years after God's bringing revival to figure out that. And I'm being honest. I'm not being false humility. And so I'm embarrassed. They give this long stringing introduction of here's this fantastic man. I have all the fears. I have all the anxieties that you have, but have been able to function within it. And God has been able to do what he's done. So those are the two things, and so then you can work in with that the 5 G's: guns, girls, gold, and you got to put Google in there too, I think. So and that's not to disconnect your brain, as I've said before. We had a problem before one time, and I had to preach in the Phoenix rally there, and I said, if your pastor's departing from the fellowship and beginning to say things that aren't in agreement with what our fellowship is, you're not bound to follow him. Find another church to go to.
That's right.
And some did. So that's, we are loyal, we are support. But when you begin to hear these little phrases, Pastor Mitchell's not God. Well, that's obvious. How brilliant you are. He's not God. What was it? One phrase is a key phrase, is that I don't agree with what the fellowship does, but I'm going to be obedient. Yeah. You hear that? Put your red flags up, because every rebel has said that word. Yeah. That's right. Obviously, we're not a perfect fellowship because we're in it. Is that right? Obviously. But God wonderfully has used us and is continuing to use us. So the reason you've been shielded is you have a good leader who's loyal to the fellowship. And, I don't know how often I talk to Pastor Ruby, but he's not, hey, can I do this? Can I do that? I don't know how we function at all. I don't even know half of what's going on in the fellowship. We appoint leaders. We trust them to take the direction of the fellowship. And if they don't, in too long you start hearing that, pastor's saying some bad things here. So you are responsible. Every person is responsible for their own soul. Never forget that.
I have a question in the arena of finances. Even though we're a pioneer work, we do have some people in our church that are faithful, and we have money in the bank and things like that. My husband and I are almost out of debt. The only thing that we have besides electricity and all that is a car payment. And so with the finances in the church, how do you start to wing yourself where the church start to support you? And should there be how much money should be in the bank before you start to wing towards the church?
How much money's in the bank before what?
Should there be a certain amount of money that stays in the account before the church start to pay some of your home bills?
Well, you'd have to work that out, and obviously with the pastor who planted you can give you some good advice on that. And so, I pastored for 25 years for a denomination, Foursquare Gospel. I took several of their churches, bailed them out, and made them solvent. And it seemed like there's no consideration given to my family. And so by the time I came to Prescott, I had some real convictions about that. One time they asked me if I'd be willing to go pioneer a church, and I said, yeah, if you pay for it, I will. But then we put a framework in Prescott so that I wouldn't have to periodically come to council and say to them, I need some money. And so we put a budget bonus in, which is, as the church grew, I was able to get a bonus out of that. And numbers of our churches have done that. As they become self-supporting, then they don't have to come back, have a meeting and say, be beggars. No, I need some money. And so that was an unwritten rule in our fellowship is you have to pay the expenses of the church before you are owed anything. Because we have pastors that drive the church deeper into debt, and then they're draining the account. And so when there's no more money left, they leave. So we put a 10% above you paid your salary and whatever benefits that you're going, and then you get 10% of the gross, which is Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. But then through the years, I reduced that down to 5%, and then I reduced it down to 4%, and Greg gets a percentage. So that enables the church to bless the pastor without having to always beg for money. But in any pioneer work, you need counsel with your pastor. who sent you out, and he can give you some judgment. On the reverse of that, we have pastors that are pastoring 90 people, and they're making executive salary. The church could never plant a church. So that's the reverse of that. And again, I can't give you, say, how much should he be? She's a secretary of treasurer, is not her calling. It's because she's my wife. And so I finally came, my life is a living hell. And so I'd asked, she didn't know, and I'm upset. And so we got tension going, and so we turned it over to somebody else to do that. So as soon as you can, that's when you do that. Somebody that's honest, that has a brain.
I got a question. I've been out about three and a half years, and I'm just curious to ask, what's a good goal to have as far, I mean, I know you said 75 people to send out of church, but we don't I know you mentioned earlier, we don't measure churches by the number of people we have, but the quality of people getting saved. But should that be a goal for someone like in my state, to try to shoot for 75 to get someone sent out? I mean, or what do you think when you first started and began your ministry? What were some goals that you had that kind of kept you?
Well, there's all kinds of, I live in a different world than you live in. And so there's all kinds of different dynamics. And so you, when you're, all kinds of different things happen. So you got somebody in your congregation that they got some good bucks. They may have a little business or something, and they want to plant themselves. You don't have 75, but they say, no worry, I'll support myself. Don't do it. Changes all the dynamics, because they're self-governing then. And if you try to bring them to distance, hey, I put my money in this. You get people who are going to plant themselves. They've got a retirement fund built up. I'll take this retirement fund, and you won't have to support me. Don't do it. Don't ever plant a worker that you're not going to support out of your church. You have people who want to sell their house. I'm going to sell my house. I'll finance my ministry. Never do it. As I've had several. I was in Australia when I had a man that told me, he said, we're going to sell my house and I'll finance myself. I said, I don't send people out that we don't finance, because it changes all the dynamics, because they're self-supporting, they're self-sufficient, they don't need you. And you'll find sooner or later that they'll begin to veer off, and they don't have to listen to you because you didn't finance them. So I don't know if that helps you.
When you're pioneering a church, and this is a question where when I was pioneering and I haven't been out pioneering, is we fellowship a lot with the folks that are coming into the church. We build relationships, and one of the problems that I always see is in that area where we become, or the people in church become too chummy with you, and they no longer look at you as pastor, but as friend. And what's a good safeguard of how to keep that from happening?
Yeah, I can't tell you that, Benny, because that is common among pastors. In our first church that we pastored, we had a lady that would want to come over and spend a half a day in the house. And so we very quickly, we stopped that, and after a visit of decent time, I say, well, we got business to do, we got to go. And so she get the hint. So I'm famous for hospitality is a tremendous dimension. I don't know if you have picked up on that. I preached a sermon on hospitality because I picked something up very interesting. When I pastored in Canada, these people are very hospitable. And so every visitor that visited, somebody would have them back for a biscuit and salmon, a cup of tea, or whatever. And I picked up on it and said, that is very, very valuable, because there's a connection there. And so we tried to put that into practice. I know in Australia I'm famous for, we'd have 3 couples over for a bowl of soup and a sandwich to tie into these people. And then after we ate our sandwich, we had our bowl of soup, and then I'd stand up and say, Sister Mitchell, we got to go to bed so these people can get some sleep. I'm famous for that. And so you can be hospitable and have a relationship without it trapping you into having to spend time that you need to be doing some other things, doing or staying up all night and robbing you of your sleep.
Pastor Mitchell, maybe you could speak for just a moment about financial accountability for pastors and some of the things that you've learned along the way from how your ministry grew and some of the things you set in place.
Yeah, so financial accountability is absolutely important. One of the things that you need to absolutely lock into your mind, once you lose credibility financially with the finances of the church, you'll never gain it back. Or if you do gain it back, it'll be very difficult. People have to trust a pastor. No, they look to a pastor as someone to follow. So one of the mistakes that is made is a pastor will raise money for whatever, a missionary or something, and then use it for something else. When you do that, you not only lose credibility with God, you lose it with your people if they find that out. Then the second thing that you need to know is that the church finances are not your own private bank. You need to have a set income. You need to have people that are council members that you're going to give accountability to. There's a cliche that conduct that is observed changes. Conduct that is observed changes. So if you have people that are your church council, you're going to have to sit down at the end of the month or the first Sunday or second Sunday, whatever you set for your council meeting, and you have to explain the figures that are on there. It's going to change the decisions that you make. In Prescott, we deal with multiple thousands of dollars. But back from the very beginning, because of my background in Foursquare, I started with a church council, sitting down with them every month. They can ask any question they want about the finances. I never buy any large piece of equipment, make any large, until I pass it by them, and I know that they are with me. I know that they're with me, and there have been the odd time when they said, "I don't think we ought to do that." Right there, that's fine with me. I'm not going to destroy my credibility, insisting that I have my own way. Right? Those people have to work with me. There was one occasion when they wanted to buy a piece of property, which is the property that our tent is on now. It was bare ground, no sewer, no light, no power, no gas, and they wanted to buy that because we were having problems Foursquare right then. And so I wasn't really wild about that, but they said we want to do that as a safety for us, and we did it as the best move we ever made, and that was totally the council that wanted to do that. I wasn't excited about that bare property, but it was a move of God. Within 6 months, I'm getting calls from real estate developer. They want to buy that property. I said, "What for?" It's bare land. Because there was a huge development going in right across the street. They knew that. We didn't. And nor did our council. They just felt God wanted to do that, and it turned out to be the hand of God. So finances are very important. You must keep your credibility. You must have a set salary that you have, and that's what you're going to get paid. And if you violate that and you go blowing money somewhere, you're going to lose your credibility with your people and with your council. And as far as I'm concerned, any church of 75 ought to have a church council of some kind. People who you're going to sit down with, they're going to see where the money's going, and if there's any major shift or major decision that's going to be made, a vehicle that's bought, or anything that you're going to draw, you make sure you've got your counsel with you. And generally, the counsel go right along with you. But they do have some wisdom, but they furnish a credibility factor into your congregation. And so if your outgo is more than your income, your upkeep is going to be your downfall. So that's, again, personally and church-wise, you must discipline yourself financially.
Pastor Mitchell, two questions that are related.
Number one, in dealing with an area, Pastor Ruby's the area leader, a lot of different churches from different places, and someone, there ends up being conflict. There's a lot of changes, different pastoral changes, different things, and you hear more often than you'd like someone say, yeah, I banned him from the fellowship, a couple or a person. Do you feel that that person, even though they're not, per se, from Pastor Ruby, I was talking to someone, they said, yeah, well, I talked to my pastor, and they said, yeah, I banned him. So do you feel that in dealing with that situation, should it go to the area leader? And then number two, when people are leaving a church, and I know this is a very delicate question, but in leaving a church, for whatever reasons, pastoral changes, but they've been there a long time, and they end up leaving, and they leave, let's say, for 3 months, and now show up at your door in your city, and they want to come in. How do you feel about all that?
Okay, very nervous area, and as I say again, we have ethics in our fellowship, and so anybody shows up at my church and they're from wherever, that's the first question I want to ask is, why are you here? And so you're very wise, number one, because you may be stepping into a minefield of a moral issue. So you want to find out why they're here. Through the history, some of our pastors have been overly reactive, and you don't agree with me. Well, I'm sending you to hell. I'm sure that this is what Jesus said when he talked about judging, which doesn't mean making a judgment about a person. It means that you're determining their future. So you're on nervous area when you're banning people from the fellowship. It ought to be in an arena where you have at least involved several levels of leadership and possibly even the Board of Elders, because they could appeal that. When you're talking about changing churches, if a pastor's abusive, many pastors, they feel they own these people. These are my people. I own these people. You don't own those people. You're in a position of shepherding, and there are many issues that have to work through. And the important thing is that churches work together. This is why we had some standards on marriage. If we early on got to keep pastors from fighting, is that they get married in the girls' church, but they attend the guys' church, because we had that early on. As there's a fight between pastor, whose church are you going to go to? So we decided that, we settled that. If there is a person that is leaving a church, or maybe a couple, 3 couples, to keep yourself out of trouble, you need to make sure that you call, what's the scoop with these people? And so there are valid reasons and valid cases where these people ought to be allowed to leave. If they're not in rebellion, if they're not sowing discord, they're free to go wherever they want to go. We don't own these people. I've got people scattered all over the map, and they had a job somewhere else. They just decided they didn't want to be here anymore. That's they joined the military. Josh, come down here. He belongs to us. There's all kinds of things that happen in life, and I don't come down every time. Hey, Josh, when are you coming home? Hey, buddy, Pastor Ruby pastored him very successfully. He's out pastoring now. I don't know if I'd ever sent Josh out if he'd stayed in Preston. So there are all kinds of dynamics, and the main thing is your ego. Pastor, someone changed his church, your ego. Hey, I'm the greatest pastor on earth, why? And so it's ego. Is what the conflict is. But you keep yourself out of trouble if you will contact your brother in the other church, and people do change churches. They're able to do that. I've got great people in Tempe. I've got great people in various places, and they went for education. I've got people that move because of job problems. and career. And so the communication is the main thing. But you have to understand that these people, there's a cliche, where you got saved, that's where God wants you to be for the rest of your life. We don't care who the pastor is or how he treats you. You're going to stay there, or you're banned from the fellowship. That's the attitude that creeps in. This is not our spirit. And if you deal with most people who have a successful church, some people, they know that, and that's why they have a large church.
Almost forgot. Okay, this is shaky ground. This is for all the women here. I understand, I grew up in the generation that women rights equal, men and women are equal. Well, I just read this book, so I had a revelation that men and women are not created equal. So God has a place for women. But in your opinion, what is the influence of the pastor's wife influence in the church? I mean, I know I'm just the wife. And I'm not just saying that, but I'm just want to know your opinion.
Mainly influence and example is your major role, which will be the most powerful, and supporting your husband, showing an example. You'd be stunned at the horrible marriages that are in life. I mean, it's a mess. And so men and women are not equal. Are you still with me? They are not equal. That's why God put men in charge. Jesus had 12 disciples. They were all men. Right? Okay. I can feel this now. See. And we have a very strong fellowship with male leadership. I come out of the Foursquare organization where women were proudly paraded as they are in charge. The other man is the head, but the neck turns the head. All these cliches. And it produced some very ugly stuff. And I came out of that. I was saved in that kind of church. Thank God for my background. I thank God for that. But as I began to pastor and begin to observe how this was working out in families, I began to set an example and began to emphasize that men have the responsibility to lead the home. That doesn't give them the right to abuse or to disrespect or to constantly get up, hey, we're in charge, these women are nothing. When you hear a pastor say that, he's headed for deep trouble. Okay, but by an example and by how I deal with people, give women dignity, give them appreciation, they'll back you as far as you want to go. When I went to Australia, I left Jack Harrison in charge and came back. And when I came back, we had 3 strong women that were vying for control. I'm talking strong women. And there's nothing that is more irritating than strong women that are going to dominate a church. And so I didn't set them down and say, hey, you know what? I'll bruise you bad. I just simply came in, set the example. I'm setting the leadership. I'm making the decisions, just leveled right out. But where you find a vacuum, then this is where women feel that they have to get things straightened out,
Pastor Mitchell, you've set an example for us, and I really believe it's by the grace of God that you're still with us, that you're here to be able to minister and to preach. And I know for myself, and I'm sure I'm speaking for the rest of my brethren, that should Jesus tarry, we want to hit your age and still be preaching the gospel the same way. And if that should happen, should Jesus tarry, in our fellowship, what do you see as the greatest challenge we're facing in the day and hour in which we live? And what is it as pastors we need to be preaching today, probably more now than ever?
Well, you need to give attention to doctrine, number one. Doctrine. Preachers, our tools are words. Did you hear what I said? The tools of our trade are words. The Bible is a book of words. What's happening today is that words are being reinterpreted how they want to interpret them. As one cliche says, words, Humpty Dumpty said, mean exactly what I want them to mean. Nothing more, nothing less. No, words mean something. And so what's happening today is that the emerging church, these hot shots are reinterpreting and explaining the word how they want it to be. And when you see that, you need to run for your life. And so our fellowship is a preaching fellowship, but you must stick to doctrine. I just preached a sermon on those that are working in Muslim countries, and they're using translations where Jesus is reinterpreted rather than be the Son of God. I mean, you're talking deadly, deadly stuff. And I got triggered on a whole sermon. I didn't realize how many places it absolutely goes out of the way to say Jesus is the Son of God. Now, the reason they're doing that is that the Muslims, when you say that, they inflame. You mean God had sexual relationships with Mary? And immediately they go into a foaming fit. And so they're trying to cater to that. But I mean, over and over, 3 times the only begotten Son of God. And over again, Jesus Christ, the very Son of the living God. And so that means something. That's important. But that's what's being done around the world, willing to yield to cater to somebody's preference. And so doctrine is important. Preach doctrine. Put doctrine in your people and insist on it. So that's the main thing. And so if you want to live as long as I am, drink a lot of coffee, use a lot of salt, sugar, fat, and you'll be fine. Okay, the thing that I have to say is I have a deep appreciation for pastors and their wives, because the core of our fellowship are the precious people like you who've caught a vision for souls, and you want to see the gospel of Christ propagated, and you're willing to make a sacrifice to do that. This is why that we have our Bible conferences. This is why that I try to pull everybody back to Prescott and rebuild this mega center, is to effectively do that. You have to reach out and let these pastors have expression on their own and develop. And San Antonio's a wonderful example. Tucson's a wonderful example. El Paso has just come through. And around the world, we have pastors just like you and their wives that are paying the price, and that's where the future of our fellowship is. And I want to say to you that in my conviction, Gabriel, we have a wonderful future, because we have not yet fully seen what God's going to do. I just preached I think in El Paso, that God has put our fellowship in place in around the world, and we are uniquely equipped to reach what God is going to. Even now, it's already beginning, and I believe that our future is as bright as it can be, because we have emphasized over and over again, preach the word. Preach the word. We're not entertainers. We don't get up and entertain people with jokes and some kind of philosophy or narrative, as has become the popular thing. The Bible is narrative. No, the Bible is the Word of God. Let me leave this cliche with you. It's common to say, and this is the emerging church, it's very popular, well, the Bible is narrative. It's divine narrative. Well, the Bible contains the Word of God. No, it doesn't contain the Word of God. It is the Word of God. Write that down somewhere and remember it. If you hold to that, well, you have a great future. Amen. God bless you. Thank you for inviting me.